Do you have an interest in the legacies that historical and not so historical figures leave behind? Are you curious about how to ensure family heirlooms and life lessons are passed on from generation to generation? Are you interested in developing your end-of-life plan to alleviate family discord and encourage generational wealth? Well, I invite you to listen to Heirloom and Legacy, a podcast that explores ancestry, heirlooms, legacy, mortality, and more. I am Angeline C. Fraser Giles, your host, and I look forward to sharing these discussions with you. Hi, and thank you for listening today. In this week's episode, I am revisiting an interview I did entitled No One is Getting Out Alive: How These 5 Films Illustrate End-of-Life Planning Steps and Missteps. On 5x5, a movie podcast, film blogger and Trekkie Subrina Wood compares 5 films in a particular genre. Subrina, also known as the Cinnamon Cinephile, is a film aficionado and co-host of the Sci-Fi Sisters podcast. I appeared on her show to discuss 5 films that depict various ways the characters experience and handle death and dying, and the various nuances that exist when dealing with end-of-life care, grief, heirlooms, and legacy.
Death for many of us is very scary. Even though I am an end-of-life doula, it's still scary. You have all of these feelings of, well, have I done enough? Have I done everything that I said I was going to do? Is everything taken care of in terms of my kids? If I have young kids, who's going to take care of them? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things to think about, and there's a lot of reasons why people don't want to talk about end-of-life planning. But end-of-life planning now will save a lot in terms of family discord, in terms of your family having to spend hours and years and thousands of dollars potentially, court fines and fees, and it just makes things so much easier if your estate just goes the way you want it. And it doesn't allow the government to come in and say what should be done with your property. If in fact you have property and you don't have a will, the state comes in and decides who gets it, and maybe it's someone that you don't want. The state can come in and decide who gets your kids, and maybe you don't want your kids to go with a certain person because you don't trust them with either the money, or you don't trust them with around your kids for whatever reason. And so having end-of-life planning done is really, really important. Okay. And there's so many things that go along with that, but we want to just go through some of these films that I think really address death in ways that's sometimes funny, sometimes scary, but I think all of these films really kind of lay out what death could potentially look like.
It's another part of life. And there are some movies here where, they go through this whole thing. It's not something that it's not to be expected. And this is something that you don't do just when you finally get the word that you are going to die. Like, say, you get a terminal notice. I mean, this is something that you need to plan for, just like you're doing your insurance, just like you're doing your big dreams for your house. And it's like, okay, this is how I would like to go.
That said, since 5x5 primarily focused on the films and less on the death and dying elements in the films, I wanted to delve deeper into the themes here on Heirloom and Legacy. The 5 films we discussed were The Bucket List with Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson, Free Hell with Julianne Moore and Ellen Page, now known as Elliot Page, Steel Magnolias, with a cast of characters including Dolly Parton, Sally Field, Olympia Dukakis, Shirley MacLaine, Daryl Hannah, and Julia Roberts, Nights in Rodanthe with Richard Gere, Diane Lane, Viola Davis, and Christopher Meloni, Imitation of Life, the 1959 version with Lana Turner, Sandra Dee, Juanita Moore, and a guest appearance by the incomparable Mahalia Jackson. And finally, I give a special nod to 7 Pounds with Will Smith, Rosario Dawson, Woody Harrelson, and Michael Ealy. There are spoiler alerts in both podcasts, so I encourage you to watch the films if you haven't yet before listening. And please note, the movie descriptions are taken from the Internet Movie Database and YouTube. First up, The Bucket List. Billionaire Edward Cole, played by Jack Nicholson, and car mechanic Carter Chambers, played by Morgan Freeman, are complete strangers until fate lands them in the same hospital room. The men find they have two things in common: a need to come to terms with who they are and what they have done with their lives, and a desire to complete a list of things they want to see and do before they die. Against their doctor's advice, the men leave the hospital and set out on an adventure of a lifetime. This line from Morgan Freeman in the movie is one of the many poignant. He quotes, "It is difficult to understand the sum of a person's life. Some people will tell you it's measured by the ones left behind. Some believe it can be measured in faith. Some say by love. Other folks say life has no meaning at all." I love this movie because it focuses on living life to the fullest, even when you are at your worst. The bucket list begins as a metaphorical list, but the characters decide to intentionally live out the list from the mundane to the extraordinary. What I also appreciate about the film is that it doesn't shy away from the painful and physical reality of cancer. And unfortunately, many of us may be dealt that hand in the end. This movie allows for the experiences of life to be interjected with the realities of death. Movie number 2 is Freeheld and is based on a true story. Diagnosed with terminal cancer, decorated New Jersey detective Laurel Hester wishes to receive her pension benefits to domestic partner Stacy Andre. Denied by local county officials, Laurel receives help from hard-nosed colleague Dan Wells and activist Stephen Goldstein, who unite to rally fellow police officers and ordinary citizens to support the couple's fight for equality. Julianne Moore's character delivers a line in the film that sums up the issue. When heterosexual partners die, their pensions go to their spouses. But because my partner is a woman, I don't get to do that. In my 23 years of being a police officer, I've never asked for special treatment. I'm only asking for equality. Personally, I think about change agents when I see this film, because this movie is a testament to the will of two people whose case has the potential to benefit the broader society. And this case did. One of the primary themes is the ability for those in domestic living situations to have a say in their loved one's care while in a medical facility, as well as to receive benefits from a loved one in the case of their death, regardless of whether or not they are married. Movie number 3, Steel Magnolias. In Truvy Jones's Louisiana beauty parlor, a tightly knit band of friends confront grief, loss, life's unforeseen tragedies, and heartaches with what they do best: gossiping and sharing. The spirited, diabetic, and bride-to-be Shelby, her always supportive mother, Malin, Truvy's gawky assistant, Annelle, the city's curmudgeon, Weezer, and the town's former first lady, Clarie, are the warm Southern belles who know how to survive life's challenges with their unwavering friendship. But when Shelby decides to conceive, things will turn upside down. Shelby is left on life support, and the family has to make the difficult decision to take her off the ventilator. The true story of Terry Schiavo, whose heart suddenly stopped and her brain was denied oxygen, presides an example of this reality. For years, Terry Schiavo's husband waged a battle against her parents to take her off of life support. Finally, in March 2005, 15 years and thousands of dollars later, Mrs. Schiavo was taken off the ventilator. In an advanced care directive, you would designate whether you want to remain on life support, and your family would not be left with that burden. Movie number 4, Nights in Rodanthe. Adrienne is a woman with her life in chaos, and she retreats to the tiny coastal town of Rodanthe in the Outer Banks of North Carolina to tend to a friend's inn for the weekend. Richard Gere's character, Flanner, is at the inn to face his own crisis of conscience. With a storm closing in, the two turn to each other for comfort, and in one magical weekend set in motion a life-changing romance that will resonate throughout the rest of their lives. This film is a love story with elements of loss and grief.
A stage of grief that, like Diane Lane, when she gets the note about, when she gets the notice about Richard Gere, and even in what was the other movie we heard? Even The Bucket List, when the wife is told that Morgan Freeman doesn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
You just have this. You're not okay, and that's part of it.
You're not okay, and no one would expect you to be okay.
Mm.
Okay, but the other thing about the grief is that while people may have known your loved one and you are still grieving, people may move on and you're still there grieving. And it's okay for you to continue to grieve. And for people who can't understand it, it's their grief for them to bear. And so the only thing you can do is be there and be supportive, because people grieve differently.
And to that end, the intense love letters they write to each other prove to be a sad and poignant legacy of their love, as expressed in the line, "I love you now for what we've already shared, and I love you now in anticipation of all that's to come." The next film, 7 Pounds, receives an honorable mention. Haunted by a secret, Ben Thomas looks for redemption by radically transforming the lives of 7 people he doesn't know. Once his plan is set, nothing will be able to stop him. At least that's what he thinks. But Ben hadn't planned on falling in love with one of the individuals he meets on his journey. 7 Pounds is a roller coaster ride of love and grief. And it isn't until the midway point of the film that Ben's plot is revealed. Culminating in Ben's ultimate sacrifice, 7 people receive life-altering gifts of an organ donation.
I am an organ donor, so it's very easy to do. You can, at the DMV, you can check it on your license and say that you want, if you're in an accident like that, you want to be able to donate your organ, so you don't have to go get a Portuguese man of war. So
Wow.
like this guy, like this guy's doing, there's easier ways to do this. Yeah, it's very simple. So I'm also a bone marrow donor too.
I just got my kit, actually, my bone marrow.
Your
kit.
bone marrow? Mm-hmm.
So that I can take the test and they can.
Yep. I took the test. It's no pain. Yep. And I'm in the bone marrow database. So
and it's really important for Black people to become bone marrow donors, because our bone marrow is so different, and there's sometimes not necessarily matches, because there are, whatever the DNA structure or whatever it is, we tend to not find donors if we need.
Or we don't match. We don't match
the database of folks who are actually in the database.
My number 1 movie is Imitation of Life. The legendary Lana Turner stars in this 1959 version of Imitation of Life, which chronicles 2 widows and their troubled daughters as they struggle to find true happiness amidst racial prejudice. Lana Turner plays Laura, a single white mother whose Hollywood starlet ambitions come at the expense of any meaningful relationship with her daughter, Susie, played by Sandra Dee. Laura's Black housekeeper, Annie, played by Juanita Moore, has troubles of her own as she faces the rejection of her own fair-skinned daughter, Sarah Jane, played by Susan Conner, who abandons her heritage for a chance to be accepted as white. Annie expresses to Laura, "How do you tell a child she was born to be hurt?" That's pretty poignant. As years of selfishness and denial pass, tragedy strikes and forces the women to come to terms with their own identities. This film stops me in my tracks whenever it comes on. On her deathbed, Annie offers a pearl necklace for Susie and a fur scarf to her pastor's wife as heirlooms she is leaving them. She has prepared a will with detailed instructions of her funeral. In what must be one of the most elaborate movie funerals of all time, Annie's funeral is replete with a horse-drawn carriage and the haunting spiritual voice of Mahalia Jackson. What is so telling about this movie is that Annie lives modestly in life, but splendidly in death. Her actions remind us that having a plan for end of life is something that we can all do and that we should do. She states, "Our wedding day and the day we die are our greatest events of life."
I think that is very telling, that a lot of us go into marriages and have these big weddings, and we do all this planning because it's this great thing, right? And so why aren't we planning the same thing for the end of life? Why aren't we putting enough time and effort into end of life as we did for a wedding? And a lot of it is because a wedding is supposed to be a really joyous thing. It's a joyous celebration where end of life means someone's leaving this earth as you know it. But why not go out, in that same type of splendor? Because you had a beautiful life, right? You had a life where people cared about you. You cared about people, where you accomplished something. You may not have accomplished everything that you wanted to do, but you had some accomplishments and you meant something to people.
And you want to celebrate that.
And people should want to celebrate that. They want it to be so it shouldn't be that we spend all this money and plan all this elaborate wedding, and we put all this time and effort into planning a wedding, but we don't do that on the tail end of a funeral. And I'm not saying you should spend a ton of money on a funeral either.
You don't need an imitation of life funeral.
So I hope you have appreciated my top films portraying themes of death and dying that may offer you guidance in your end-of-life journey. Next week's episode is part 1 of interviews I did with 3 amazing guests who found out about their legacy in a very unique way. I hope you will tune in. Thank you for listening to Heirloom and Legacy. If you want to learn more about the work of heirloom estate and legacy preservation, you can find us at legacypreservation.life, on Instagram at Legacy Preservation, and on Twitter at Heirloom Legacy. Many thanks to my exceptional executive assistant, Queen Karen Garrison, aka Mommy Activist, and my outstanding engineer, Jonathan Reed. Thank you again for choosing Heirloom and Legacy. Please like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us.